Welcome to the Light and Shadow podcast. I am Grey, quantum-informed spiritual mentor, founder of the Grey Ethereus Academy, and creator of the Alchemical Pattern-to-Healing Framework. I work at the threshold where insight alone stops working and real transformation begins. This is the space for the spiritually aware who are ready to go deeper than healing has taken them. Today's conversation is about consciousness as technology. Not metaphor, not wishful thinking, but a trainable, measurable system that we can learn to operate with precision. We're talking about what happens when a biochemist has a near-death experience and discovers that awakening isn't mystical escape, but evolutionary mechanism. My guest is Crystal Cassidy, founder and CEO of SoulPod. Crystal spent nearly 2 decades in biotechnology and oncology research, helping bring the first blood-based diagnostic for solid tumor cancers to market as director of clinical operations. Then, in 2020, a near-death experience shattered her previous model of reality and led her to walk away from that career entirely. What emerged as a unique synthesis, she is a Reiki master, Kundalini yoga teacher, transformational breathwork practitioner, and meditation facilitator who approaches spiritual practice with the same rigor she once applied to clinical trials. Through SoulPod, she teaches people to regulate their nervous systems, re-encode their inner signal, and access what she calls the deeper operating system of reality itself. What I appreciate about Crystal's work is that she refuses to separate science from spirit. She's interested in measurable change, nervous system regulation, and the distinction between expanded perception and objective reality. This is spirituality, not as escape from the world, but as technology for awakening within it. Before we start, I want to say this. Some of you listening may have had experiences that broke your previous understanding of reality. Some of you may be scientifically trained and skeptical of mystical claims. Some of you may be navigating the territory between both. All of those positions are welcome here. This conversation isn't about choosing science or spirit. It is about exploring what becomes visible when we hold both with equal rigor. Crystal, welcome to the Light and Shadow.
Thank you, Grey. That was a beautiful introduction.
Crystal, you had a successful career in biotech. What specifically broke your previous model of reality after your near-death experience?
I think it was starting to shift and fracture before the near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Kundalini awakening in 2015, and so that started to kind of open the aperture a bit more. But I would say the near-death experience came at a time where I had one foot in one world and one foot in the other world, and I was having a really hard time taking that final step into what would be a new phase for me. And so you could potentially say that that's why that came into my experience, but I think the why is always bigger than maybe we'll ever understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the near-death experience for me, coming from biotech, having a lot of scientific minds around me, very, very powerful minds. It was 2020, you can imagine. It was a virus, COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the analytical side of me of trying to hack the equation, trying to figure out how to solve it, it couldn't go with me where I was going to go, which was really my worst nightmare looking back on it, which is having something that we don't understand and nobody really has an answer to. And I was on my own. It was very isolating. I was not only in quarantine in the hospital where my husband couldn't go, but I was not supported by the medical establishment, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. There was nothing to be done at that time. And so it was very daunting. I had to face fears of death. I felt death as an energy come into my space, which may sound odd to some, but it's almost like an old friend showing up at your door that you didn't expect, and you have some familiarity with it, and you're like, "Oh, I remember you." And so I could feel a lot of that shifting in my experience. And even before the near-death experience, I was doing a meditation teacher training the month before this happened, and I was starting to have premonitions. I could feel something coming, and I was having flashes of also what you could call past life, simultaneous life, but I could feel it was tied to what I was about to go through. And so it was all very confusing, right? Because as I got sicker and sicker, my relationship to my body was shifting. And I was coming in and out of my body, in and out of my experience. It was very hard to be in a body whose cardiovascular system was failing, neurological system was failing. I could no longer walk. So it was very severe. And I knew enough from my medical friends that what was killing people was cytokine storms. And so I knew when my lungs started to get hot and then cold and then stiff, like bricks on your chest, and these cycles, the storm was starting to happen in my lungs. I knew enough to know that I was in trouble at that point. And ultimately, the experience of surrender came in. And this is it's a very hard thing to describe, but I'll do my best. There's a moment where I'm in and out of my body. I really don't want to stay in my body, to be honest. It's not a fun place to be. And I had this moment where it's surrender on another level that I had not experienced before. It wasn't a giving up. It was a giving over to something else outside of myself, bigger than myself. And when that happened, simultaneously, this all happened at one time. I didn't go into the light, but there was a being that met me, came into this liminal space that I was in. It was highly intelligent. It was deeply loving. It saw me for who it is that I truly am. It's the best way I can put it. And I could feel it interacting with my energetic system, also sensing my body responding at the same time. So this was an interaction. What it felt like is my first energy center, the very base of my spine, was lit up. Then the space between my eyebrows, the sixth center, and then the heart space. And it went just like bing, 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 1, 2, 3. And I could feel myself kind of almost like a shock wave of coming back into my body in that surrendered state. And I think that really looking back on it, what allowed that to happen was the surrendering part and then the asking for help part. There was something within me beyond the conscious mind that sent out a call for help. And then this being responded immediately. And so what that taught me is that there's so much support out there for us, but we have to get out of our own way. And the resistance to the experience is frustratingly what's in between you and that. And so that's really one of the big things that I took. But in the year that I was recovering, which took quite a bit of work to come fully back into my body, I had multiple mystical experiences. One of them being when I got back home, I walked out, finally when I could walk, first thing I did, walked out onto our fire escape, sat down in our chair, looked up at the sky, had this profound moment of oneness and a feeling that I was going to be okay. I was going to make it through this.
That was a miracle.
It was a miracle, and I had a meditation about a year ago. I was about 3 hours into it, and my heart blasted open, and I traveled to that moment on the fire escape with my past self. And I realized all at one time that what I was feeling back then was my future standing in front of me. And I could feel the difference in the frequency. I could feel the difference in what I had done and who I had become. And so there was an exchange that was happening in that moment, and that's what I was feeling. And so that really also opened my eyes personally to the idea that healing can be so multidimensional, and sometimes it can even be you from the future, from another time, from another space, another lifetime maybe. And there's a lot to all that, but those were some of the bigger elements that really shifted what I thought was possible from there. And once you experience that, there's just there's no going back.
100%. That's fascinating. It wasn't just an emotional shift, it was a complete recalibration of what you understood to be possible. That's beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, as someone trained in science, what was harder to reconcile, the experience itself or what it implied about reality?
Such a good question. I think that coming from the scientific field, I had a deep desire to explain it all. I was like, how do I explain what happened? It was less of a difficulty in accepting the experience. I accepted it pretty readily. It felt more true than true, more real than even this reality. So that was maybe surprisingly pretty easy for me. But I would say what I maybe got frustrated with is like, but how? How do I explain this to people? How do I explain this biologically, physiologically? And that's what I still spend quite a bit of time on, trying to understand. And I think we can only understand it to a certain degree because, Stephen Hawking's latest book, his last book, his last theory, was rethinking how we orient towards time and the laws of our universe, and it being more emergent than we previously thought.
Exactly.
And I like to think that this experience is the same, and that there are multiple layers of truth.
100%.
And they can hold themselves within one another. And so I think that in this realm, science is a really powerful way of knowing. But there are other ways of knowing that the human senses, which are limited, our ability to perceive in this realm is one way to perceive. And I think that we can start to access other ways to know and to perceive.
100%, totally agree. At the end of the day, your inner compass is the most trustworthy guidance you can have. And if you are so tuned in and in alignment, you really do not need science to explain anything to you. You just know. And that
absolutely
is power. You just know, right?
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
You could file the experience away as anomaly, but you couldn't ignore what it suggested about the nature of consciousness, about the nature of identity, and what we have been calling real. So, Crystal, you describe awakening as measurable. What exactly is being measured? Biology, perception, behavior, or something else? And how did you know that you had the Kundalini awakening in 2015?
Great question. I'll answer the latter part first. So in 2015, I was in meditation. I have been a meditator since I was about 12 because I did martial arts for a long time. I was a big martial arts nerd, and I call it the warrior yoga. So I didn't know it at the time, but it was shaping me deeply. And very lucky to have found meditation pretty young. And so I was meditating. I was in, my later 20s at that point. And it was a simple meditation. About 20 minutes in, I had done some breath work, and all of a sudden something started to emerge into my experience. And it was like an an inner heat flowing. There's movement to it, starting in the pelvis. And so this is why I really like to mention here that people tend to think of Kundalini as sexual sometimes in nature. And I was starting to experience some of that activation. And so it moved from my first center to my second center. And I simultaneously had this oneness experience. So it didn't move all the way up my channel in the first experience. For me, it moved over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for me, was pretty great because so much shifted every time it moved. And the way that I understand it is we always have this energy moving into our central channel, but there is a protective mechanism, and it's a good reason that we have this protective mechanism because we need to be ready to move that kind of energy. And so that can start to open. I think of it as a dam at the base of your central channel.
And that's
that starts to open up.
It's a pre-awakening. It comes gradually and then it's it. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so that started to open up. And the sexual activation is just simply your nervous system bleeding out into those nerves in that area, which makes complete sense. Mm-hmm. So, of course, when it got to my third center, I got nauseous. And there's physical aspects of that much energy starting to move. And that changed everything because I no longer believed that we were all connected, which I did believe before.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it to be true. And when you speak of a change in perception, that was a permanent change in perception to recognize and connect with and be in experience with that oneness where I could look at anything and I could feel part of myself in it,
mm-hmm.
which also can be a little disorienting, especially when it got pretty intense. And that required, again, surrender to some of the more intense parts of that experience where you kind of fractal into everything. And this relationship to identity, like you mentioned, identity, really starts to shift. And you start to see yourself as a fractal of perception, different ways to perceive. I can perceive through what I call my human crystal here and my orientation to self and other. That's one way to perceive. Another way to perceive is by letting go of that orientation and becoming more fluid with everything that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's various layers and levels to that.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately of this, it's why I like to call it inner technology, because I do think of it as a technology.
Yeah.
Technology can be optimized. It can be consciously interacted with. It can be turned on and off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this is. And we as a species are just now realizing that we have this within us. Yeah. And it blows AI out of the water, I think. So yes, I think it will be more and more measurable.
More and more measurable. It's not like behavioral. There's no behavioral markers. Things that show up.
I think there are some. I think there are definitely behavioral markers. One of them is your relationship to service.
Mm-hmm.
I think that tends to be pretty consistently across people who start to activate this experience. Yeah. Their relationship to service changes because it's no longer, you understand now that we actually are connected. So service becomes not something you do to get something out of it or feel good about yourself or even to do good. You're doing it because you see yourself in everything. Right. And so you're serving the experience is serving yourself. So that's one thing that I do notice is very consistent in people who have activated this.
It's coherent.
And there's certainly different levels because when you're ruled by the ego and you don't realize that it's ruling you, you really are a slave to patterns. And so people that can start to move consciously, open that aperture at will, can start to put their ego in the back seat when they choose to. And
100%.
now you're creating a whole new reality for yourself. You're no longer ruled by your patterns or your compulsions.
Yeah,
And that is freedom. That's when you're moving towards enlightenment,
100%.
because enlightenment is freedom.
Yeah,
That's the core component of it.
yeah.
Free from the limitation and the
The
separation.
first step is awareness. That's crucial in order to
Yes.
get there. So, Crystal, where do you personally draw the line between scientific observation and interpretation?
Good question. I really like the term spiritual scientist.
Okay.
I like it because you get to explore and it gives you permission to be curious and to try something
Okay.
and to observe the experience. If I try this breath, or if I try to go into meditation beyond an hour, what's going to happen there? And I have a hypothesis that maybe something else will open up, that maybe I can go to another level of interdimensionality. Maybe I will be able to access answers to a certain question that I haven't been able to find clarity on. Maybe I'll be able to heal this physical issue that I am experiencing. And so there's intention, but held loosely, staying disconnected to the how. And then there's your hypothesis, what you think might happen. You haven't, which is also part of the intention. And then the experience itself, which ultimately, there's elements of that we can't necessarily measure yet, but we can be our own observers.
100%.
Right? So that's part of science, is the N of one, what's what we call N of one experience and observation. And so that's why I like the term spiritual scientist, because you are the N of one, and your experience is a data point. And so you can start to explore the awakening process for yourself. And that's why I tend to only study with really amazing people, but I study with teachers that think of awakening in that way as well. And that there is always something new to be discovered.
Yeah.
That it isn't all figured out, because this is an ever expanding universe.
Sure.
So have fun with it. Be the spiritual scientist.
Yeah.
Try something and really hone your intention and your hypothesis, and then go find out for yourself, because that's really the most fun, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's responsible. The data is what it is. The meaning is what we assign to it. And that's where interpretation begins. And that's where we need to stay humble. And
Absolutely.
in your view, what does mainstream science still fundamentally misunderstand about consciousness?
Ooh, oh, such a good question. I could talk about this all day. I have a deep love and appreciation for science, and for those in academia who are dedicating their lives to these big questions. And I've worked with many of them, and they're profoundly great people doing really important things. That being said, and I do think this is shifting, because science is so focused, understandably, on what we can observe in this reality through it's a philosophy that consciousness is neuron firing experience. That's the current neuroscience philosophy about what consciousness is.
Okay.
And if you assume that, and that's how AI is built, by the way, is assuming that the brain and intelligence is linear and algorithmic, which those of us who have had these experiences know that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so there's emergent conversation around this, especially in the last 5 years. And I think it's going to be accelerated because of AI,
For sure.
because it's showing us, okay, wait, what is intelligence? Is an intelligence just the ability to deal with high amounts of data and find patterns? Maybe not. And I don't think it is. I think that's one element of intelligence. But and there's some really great quantum physicists that I'm friends with that are really pushing this conversation with philosophers and neuroscience people. But what we're discovering is that there is a quantum component to the brain. It's highly likely there's a quantum component to the brain.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's why microtubules are getting a lot of attention right now.
Yeah.
And so if that's true, let's just assume for a moment that it is, because it's looking that way, then that means that it's both and. We have a neurological component to consciousness, neuron fires experience, and we have a field-based experience to consciousness. And ultimately, I think consciousness is just fundamental. Awareness is fundamental. It's beyond fundamental. It is from where all of this is experienced. But we're starting to understand better our orientation to that mechanism. And I'm really excited about where that's going to go, because once we, as a species, start to understand that we are interdimensional, because that's what this field-based experience is. You can move outside of time. You can move alongside time. That's going to change everything once we actually perceive ourselves in that way. That's a whole different type of species and experience.
Once you perceive yourself,
and so,
you don't, there's no time.
Right. Yeah, it's all now.
Yeah. And definitely, we are already expanding, and, it's very fast because, again, Fibonacci sequence, this is what we are actually progressing with. It's just going to be exponential.
Yes, I agree.
The materialistic assumption here that consciousness is produced by the brain rather than something the brain interfaces with limits the entire frame of inquiry.
Exactly.
You cannot find what you are not looking for. You describe consciousness as something that can be trained like technology. And I love that. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing that's coming to mind about consciousness, and because you just reminded me of it, which is that in the scientific community, we've always had this orientation towards trying to create experiments that are controlled and that take ourselves out of it. So think very practically of like looking at a petri dish. And we've created all of these components of that experience, that test, that hypothesis within this petri dish. But we're looking down at it. We're taking ourselves out of the equation. And that's why I think the scientific community as well is having a hard time. You just pointed to that, is we can't take ourselves out of it. By the nature of us being we're consciousness, we're automatically a part of the equation. That's why quantum physics is so frustrating for so many, because they try and take themselves out of it.
Yeah.
Try and take the observer out of it, and you can't.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yes.
So this is another reason why we're having trouble with that realization. But going back to your question about it being trainable in practical terms, I would say to start with your why. So right now, when people meditate, if they choose to, it's a lot of times from the perspective of reducing anxiety, sleeping better, finding calm, and like a biohack, like a checkbox. And I don't think that's going to get you there. That is a reason. But for me, my orientation towards that kind of work has changed, and that I look at it as my goal is to bring as much of my soul, my awareness, into this dimension of experience in this lifetime, to be fully soul realized. If that's my why, then me meeting my cushion every morning becomes the most important thing I do in my day. And training this system, which is a lot of fun, by the way, and it shifts your life in ways that are just miraculous.
Yeah, depending on how you look at it, yes.
Depending on how you look at it. So I would tell people to really think about what is their orientation to, and how motivated are they to change their lives, to become more fully themselves, who they already are, to heal. You can also, a lot of people start with healing physical ailments. This is a way to do that. You'll find there's so much more to it, but that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the why is super important, because that's what's going to drive you. And then I would say start small.
For sure.
Start small, but consistently, because every time I meet my cushion, I remind myself that the universe is meeting me more than halfway. But I'm showing up. I'm taking the shot on goal, if you will. And even if you have people call it a bad meditation, there are harder meditations for sure, but there's never a bad meditation. But you will, I wish more people talked about this, you will come up against yourself. And so when you do, you'll come up against your body. Your body is miraculous. I have a whole new appreciation for this vessel, but it's going to fight you. It'll fight you until it trusts you. And then it gives itself over to you in this incredible way, so that now I can go off for a 3-hour meditation and my body's like, I got you. I'll be here when you're back. And I don't have any pain. I don't have any resistance in my body, because I've sat with it for hours and hours and hours and years and years and years. But starting small and consistently, working with your breath so that you can start to build some awareness of yourself, and know that it will be hard at times, especially in the beginning. And I don't really agree with these studies about meditation that say that it increases anxiety.
No, it
or can
doesn't.
make it worse.
Yeah, no.
I don't agree with it. I've read the studies.
Yeah.
I think I have some issues with how they're set up. But what it does do is bring awareness to what's already there.
Yeah.
It's not making it worse. Your awareness is growing. But with that awareness, and I'm not saying it's easy, you start to have the capacity to choose. And that capacity increases and increases and increases. And so
yeah, to me,
it requires
it's
courage.
The ego that stands in the way. Absolutely.
Yes.
But it doesn't increase anxiety, that's for sure. It's totally the opposite. It's just they don't know how to verbalize it in a way that you have to be, you have to go into complete surrender and remove the ego out of the equation. So and when you say we can re-encode our inner signal, what is the mechanism behind that?
There is a recoding that happens, a realignment that happens. And this inner signal is who it is that you are. It's your essence. And that signal is increasing in harmony and in relation to who it is that you really are. And you're bringing more and more of that signal into your experience. And so you can turn up the signal at will and connect with more and more of source, if you want to call it that, more and more of the field-based experience, which is where you can access more of yourself. Because when we're operating from this dimension, this space-time dimension, it's purposefully limited so that we can orient to the experience of separation. That's why we're here. We're human. We should have that experience. I don't want to say for anybody to run from it, because it's a beautiful experience and I love being in my human. But when you have that signal, this baseline that you can start to shift, that means that you have more and more access to your higher self in the driver's seat, and the ego's in the back seat. And you can put it in the driver's seat when you want to, but it's not driving you where you don't want to go anymore. And so this, and much more practically, maybe it's the amount of energy that you can move into this dimension. So your toroidal field of energy is increasing as this signal increases. And that starts to become really trippy and psychedelic and metaphysical in how you relate to this reality. And you start to have more and more control, if you want to use the word control, more and more will, I would say is probably a better word, in how you run that signal.
So you're working at the level of the signal to noise ratio of your inner experience.
I like that. Yeah.
You're not changing the content, you're changing the operating system.
I love the word coherence because I think that's accurate. The coherence increases.
Yeah.
And so when that coherence starts to increase, and we're starting to understand this, the heart-brain coherence especially, there is so much communication happening there. And I think that's really what starts to open up the experience more deeply.
Yeah, that's what I referred to earlier about coherence. When you were talking about near-death experience. So, do you see consciousness as something generated by the brain, or something the brain interfaces with?
I think consciousness is fundamental.
Yeah.
I think the brain is interacting with it. And that we're in these vessels where we get to experience a degree of separation by the nature of being in a vessel, in the physical, in this dimension. But it's foundational. Consciousness is the screen. You want to think about a movie theater. It is the screen of the experience. And the brain is simply creating or interacting with the image that can be placed on that screen. And that's the experience we perceive. But the screen is always there. That's what's foundational.
Absolutely. If the brain is a receiver, not a generator, then consciousness exists prior and independent of the body.
Yes.
And that changes actually everything about how we approach awakening. Crystal, you emphasize nervous system regulation as key to awakening. Why is the body such a critical gateway?
Such a good question. So the body is your gateway, and the nervous system is the tool to open the door into who it is that you really are. And the nervous system regulation part of it is so important because when you're new to this, especially, there's a certain degree of safety that we need to find within ourselves in order to step into the unknown. Because these physical vessels, they're wired for this dimension. They're wired for the known. It's wired to keep you safe and for survival. And if you don't understand that wiring, you'll be controlled by it. And so nervous system regulation is starting to deeply understand your vessel wiring so that you are not limited by it and you can start to use it consciously for your expansion. That's why we always start with nervous system regulation. We always start with the breath because we want the body to know, especially at the beginning, that you're safe and that it's actually safe to step into the unknown, that I've got you. And so a lot of times when I speak to my body and it's having a hard time following me there, it doesn't want me to go into the unknown. It wants me to stay. I tell it, I've got this. And I tell my body to stay, to not fight me, that you're okay. And so that's really critical. And until you understand that relationship with your body and how the nervous system works and how it can work for you and against you.
Yeah, safety is critical.
Then it's critical. It's critical. And that's a lot of the initial work.
Yeah, you cannot bypass the body. Expanding consciousness without nervous system capacity just creates overwhelm, fragmentation, and spiritual emergency. The body has to come with you. at all times.
The body has to come with you. Yeah, it has to.
How does dysregulation distort perception or spiritual experience?
Interesting question. It's, and I have such great compassion for people who are in these experiences, and I've been there too, so I understand. I was in a meditation once where, when I was going through a lot of physical stuff at the time, I had a lot of healing from the near-death experience. I had heart issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I started to feel that chest pain, I would have an immediate, like, oh my gosh, am I going to die? Is this going to be it? Am I going to have a heart attack here?
Mm-hmm.
And I have an abnormal heart rhythm. I have had it since I was young. And they told me I would have this heart rhythm for the rest of my life. It's just something that's native to how my heart works. There's nothing to be done. Shouldn't be catastrophic, but it does cause some issues sometimes. And so I was experiencing a lot of that fear, the anxiety when that physical symptom comes up. And so the distortion that can happen is that you think that you're in control.
Yeah.
And that if you can just figure it out in your mind, that's this kind of mistruth here, then you'll be okay. The nervous system is hypervigilant. It wants to predict everything. That's how it's wired. And so you start to notice patterns, chest pain, I have an abnormal heart rhythm, anxiety comes in, I'm trying to predict what will happen, and our brain is biased towards negative outcomes. We're much more biased towards the negative, naturally.
100%. Yeah.
And so that can become its own trap. And I'm sure many can relate to that. And so the perception is that you're limited to this space and time. So I like to talk about the funnel of consciousness. So fear is down towards the bottom of the funnel. That is constricted consciousness. And we need that constriction from time to time. We want to focus, but we don't want to hang out there. And so that's where, when you're talking about the distortion, that's where it really comes in, because when your nervous system and when you're focused that deeply, you can't see other possibilities. You're not even aware of them. That's the distortion, because they exist. You just can't interact with it yet. And so that's why we work to open the aperture, so that, and that requires safety, so that you can get into the higher realms of the funnel of consciousness and you can perceive more possibility.
Yeah.
And so when I was in, maybe people will find this helpful, when I was in a 3-hour meditation, love my 3-hour meditations, because you really get to go for it. And it comes in waves. But my body was throwing all kinds of fears at me. So one of them was the heart pain. I felt like I was having a heart attack in my meditation. I was like, okay, no, I'm staying. I'm with it. Then it dissolved. That's what was so interesting. I felt it leave my experience. Then it was my neurological symptoms. My whole body felt like it was on fire, and a lot of intensity in my nervous system. I was like, nope, I'm staying. That dissolved. Then my old shoulder injury from martial arts started to hurt. And I was starting to notice a pattern. I was like, no, I'm staying. That dissolved. And so what I learned, because I stayed in the upper realms of that funnel of consciousness, I was like, oh my gosh, it really is all energy. Like, it can really shift. And the crazy thing, even for me, was I went to the doctor a couple months ago, and they were checking my heart and doing an EKG. And they came back and they're like, your heart rhythm issue is gone. And I was like, oh, interesting. I didn't think that could happen. And they're like, we're going to run it again, because maybe there was something wrong with the test. And they ran it again. And no, my heart condition is gone. I no longer have that interval problem. So, I mean, I don't know I don't have all the answers, but I do find that really, really interesting.
That is interesting. And I want to add here, or summarize what you just said, a dysregulated nervous system will misinterpret everything.
Yeah.
It's going to turn insight into paranoia, expansion into grandiosity, openness into boundary collapse. The state of your system determines what you can perceive accurately.
I agree. I think the grandiosity is that's a big one, right? I think that's why we see, certain spiritual leaders have this fall from grace, is because the ego is a nefarious element of self. And if you're not doing the work, that's why we have to stay humble. Then it can surprise you.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. So, Crystal, are practices like breathwork and Reiki altering consciousness or simply removing interference?
I love that question. I think it's the latter. I think it's removing interference. And like you mentioned, reducing that noise to truth ratio. And then really all these practices, meditation included, is reducing the interference of what is not you so that you can step into what is true.
100%. They're not adding anything. They are restoring coherence. They're clearing the static. Consciousness is already there. We're just learning to stop blocking it.
Exactly.
When you speak about extraterrestrial contact, how do you differentiate between literal phenomena and expanded states of perception?
I think they're connected.
Yeah.
My personal experience, and I can really only speak to that when it comes to this, is there is literal phenomena, physical craft. They're very in my space lately, like outside every night almost recently. And what's more interesting to me than that, because that's become less interesting to me, even though it's very cool, is the level of sophistication that these beings have. And it's all through consciousness. So the reason, even they've made this very clear, even the reason that we're in contact is only because of a certain degree of consciousness work that has been done.
Agree. Yeah.
And this is their mode of transportation. It's their mode of communication. And it's a whole system experience in connection with these interdimensional beings. And I'm very excited to see where this goes for us as a species in the next few years.
Yeah. You cannot always know. The experience is always real, but whether it is ontologically external or symbolically representation of something internal, that's harder to determine.
It is. That's where we have to be very discerning.
Yeah.
And when that connection to your higher realms of consciousness is stabilized, it makes that discernment easier. And these beings are also, they're very careful in that they are not interested in us giving up free will or power. They're interested in helping us remember who we are. And we are also interdimensional beings, just realizing that now.
Yeah.
And the way that they can approach it first is actually sometimes very metaphorical, because it could be too much for your system to handle it otherwise.
100%. 100%. You need to be a certain level of consciousness to be able to have this openness, to be able to contact or to be able to interact, even if it's metaphorically, not physically. What framework do you use to avoid misinterpreting subjective experiences as objective reality?
For me, the framework that I use is my heart space.
Okay.
It's how, if I'm connected to my heart space, and that's how I'm perceiving and interpreting, I feel pretty confident, but also holding that very lightly and not grasping onto belief. and to be willing to learn something new, or to be something to be clarified. Because when we hold on tightly to belief, the ego loves that, but it can get us into limited experiences and more limited levels of consciousness. So I don't like to say anything for sure. I can only say what I know and have experienced. And I think that really lends itself, because then there's a flexibility that is introduced. And the irony is that you likely have increased access to what is true.
So you hold it lightly. You honor the experience. You extract the insight. But you don't build rigid cosmologies around what might be phenomenological rather than literal. Many people seek expansion, but not everyone integrates it well. What does healthy integration actually look like?
Yes. Insight is not wisdom. So and I love this question because, and I constantly experience this every day. Like this morning in my meditation, I had an insight be metabolized into wisdom in a way that I hadn't experienced. That's why I love calling the awakening process the infinite onion, because there's always another layer to understand. And then
I call it too. Yeah, I call it that way too.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
I love it. It's my favorite description.
Same, yeah.
Because it also keeps you humble. If it is an infinite onion, there is no mountaintop. There are moments of that you could say, enlightenment, having that experience of expansion, but is it sustained, and is that the end?
Beautiful.
It's not.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So even Buddha, even these figures that we like to point to, that wasn't the end of their experience.
No, it was just the beginning.
It's just the beginning. So that can really liberate us from this kind of expectation, even that we're anywhere other than we need to be. And so it's an exciting experience. And maybe I'll share this, when one of those interdimensional beings actually appeared in my living room, partially materialized, that humbled me as well, because it was so much energy, it was so much consciousness, that it forced me into a meditative state, not in an unwilling way, just I had to go into my meditative experience in order to stay in experience with this intelligence. And so as much work as I've done, I was like, oh, wow, that's a that's a whole nother level of consciousness and awareness that it's actually quite difficult to even be physically in the presence of. And that keeps me humble.
Beautiful. Integration is essential, is functional. It shows up in your relationships, in your capacity for responsibility, in your groundedness. If the expansion doesn't make you more capable of living well, it is not integrated.
Absolutely. What is it Ram Dass says? If you think that you're awakened, go spend the weekend with your family.
Yeah.
You'll be humbled real quick.
Oh yeah. You will see where your ego is at.
Absolutely. And they're the ones, I like the other saying, I don't know where it's from, but you can't be surprised that you're triggered by your family, because they're the ones that installed the triggers. They're the ones whose environment you were in when they originated.
Yeah.
And so what a powerful training ground. That's how I think of it.
Yeah. I mean, you chose them for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So all of these relationships are just mirrors, training.
Yeah. To me, it's like school, going to school. This is a relationship.
Yes.
Without it, you just where you are, there's no growth, there's no expansion, there's not even an upgrade in your consciousness. How do you prevent awakening from becoming escapism rather than deeper engagement with reality?
Ooh, and I know I might have a controversial opinion on this. I'll say this. I don't think awakening is escapism, because inherently what it is you becoming more you. So how could that be escapism? I think where people can get tripped up is bringing it back down into the body and back down into, like, what you're talking about, relationships, the human experience. And I've talked to some people that are like, well, this planet is a limited planet, and some even saying it's a prison planet. And my guides have been very clear, it's not.
No.
It's like a master school experience.
Yeah.
And we're so lucky to be here to experience this.
Yeah.
And so I don't think awakening and escapism can necessarily go hand in hand because of the definition of awakening.
How do you
But I
prevent
do
it
think
if let's say, someone escaped rather than deep engage with reality? They're like, oh, I'm awakened, but they just avoidance.
So I think that's certainly an element that can emerge. And that avoidance is integration that's not happening, like we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Because when you bring that back down into the human, you start to have such a different relationship, with orientation, with your work, with your family, with your friends. And creativity is the other thing that starts to really flow, because you're connected. And so more can be received from the unmanifest into the manifest. And so I just think that the idea of, like, going into a cave and meditating, and that being, I mean, I also think all experiences are valid, but it's almost a resistance to also being human at the same time. And so there's a balance to be had. That's why I have a little bit of a more and more detached orientation to what I call my human, but I also want to be able to fully inhabit my human when I want to.
Yeah.
And then I want to be able to fully go into my highest possible echelons of self when I want to, and then see how much of that I can bring into this dimension of experience. And so I think that becomes really interesting. And if you're in the cave and you're not having any relationships, how can you even say that development is different, right?
Sure.
And we're here in relationship on this planet, in orientation to the planet and to others, for a reason. So I would guess that if you're somebody in a cave that was awakening that way, and you can make massive progress, don't get me wrong, I would assume in another lifetime you'd probably be forced to be with everybody else.
100% to rebalance the energy. The world becomes the test. If your awakening makes you less willing to engage with conflict, with complexity, with responsibility, it is spiritual bypassing. Real awakening increases your capacity for reality, not your withdrawal from it.
I agree. I agree with that. And I would just add that one of my favorite stories is from the autobiography of a yogi. And these are master teachers. And one of them got really bad news. And his students witnessed him. Not that he wasn't experiencing the sadness of that news, but he went into meditation and he processed it. So even these great awakened beings, it wasn't that they weren't interacting with life, it was that they had the tools to be able to navigate it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My last question to you, Crystal, and I could go on and on with you.
Me too.
You speak about a new phase of possibility for humanity. What does that actually require from individuals right now?
Ooh, what I just got very strongly was courage.
Courage.
It requires courage to welcome more of yourself into your experience. It requires courage to find nervous system regulation. It requires courage and curiosity to do this inner technology activation.
Okay.
And it requires courage to step into a new way of being, a new way of operating as a whole.
I love that. I might add regulation, coherence, and responsibility.
Yes.
Not more mystical experiences, more people who can stay present, stay grounded, and operate from clarity rather than reactivity. That's the foundation for anything collective. Crystal, this has been one of the most precise conversations I've had about the intersection of consciousness and science. To everyone listening, I want to leave you with something Crystal said. That consciousness isn't something mystical we access through escape. It is technology we can train systematically with the same rigor we apply to any other skill. But the body has to come with you. The nervous system has to be regulated. The integration has to be real. You can find Crystal work at soulpodapp.com, where she offers tools, practices, and community for training consciousness as a daily technology. She's building a framework that doesn't ask you to choose between science and spirit, but to hold both with precision. If this conversation brought something up for you, if you've had experiences that broke your model of reality, or if you are navigating the territory between expansion and integration, you can learn more about my private coaching and mentorship at the link in the description show below. If this conversation simply left you with a question, what am I interfacing with? Then sit with that. Let it recalibrate what you thought was possible. This is the Light and Shadow podcast. Thank you for listening with an open mind and a discerning heart. Until next time.